Welcome to the Empowered Homes podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to be a resource to connect church and home by growing strong families.
Hey, this is Bobby Cooley. Today on the show, we have an interesting topic. We're going to be talking about conflict in marriage. I actually have my wife here. We're going to be talking together with Brad Flurry and Liz Flurry about marriage and conflict. On the show, we're going to tackle some reasons why conflict exists. In a perfect world, we'd all get along and everything be great, but that's not the reality of our worlds. And so conflict does exist. Because it does exist, how do we find resolution? So we talk about some tips for going after conflict resolution, how to separate the conflict or separate the problem from the person, as well as how to genuinely put aside your pride and apologize. We're not experts, but we're honest, so you'll hear some stories from our past and what we've struggled with. If you want more information about marriage or any resources on marriage or more information about dealing with conflict in your marriage, go to empoweredhomes.org. Today on the show, we have Brad Flurry and his wife, Liz, as well as my wife, Jenn Cooley, on the show with us. Welcome, guys.
Hey.
Hey, Bobby.
Brad, Liz, tell us about you guys, how long you've been married, all that good stuff.
Brad and I have been married over 20 years now. We have two boys. We have a 15-year-old and almost 13, and I spend a lot of time driving them around to sports and different activities.
Nice. So, just before we start, is there any conflict in your marriage?
Oh, what? No, never. Of course there is. Of course.
Only on days that end in Y.
There you go. So, we're not experts. Jenn, tell the audience about how long we've been married and all that good stuff.
Okay, so we've been married for 12 years. In August was 12 years. We have 3 kids, 2 boys. Charlie's 7, Chapman is 2, and our daughter is Chandler May, and she is 5.
5 years old.
5 years old, and we have a crazy house and a dog named Moose.
Dog named Moose. The Moose always gets a mention. It's crazy. Yeah. So, Jenn, this is a safe place. Do we have conflict in our marriage?
Every day.
Every day? No, not every day.
No, not every day.
She jumped right into that answer.
Man.
No.
I'm regretting asking you to be on this now. So we'll see how this goes. Oh, man. So we were so excited to be talking about this topic. And a lot of people, and especially in church world, it's one of the things we hide. You don't talk about conflict. You keep it yourself. You got to put on that straight face when you're at church. And but everybody, if you've been married for one day or 100 years, have dealt with conflict. And so today we want to address, 2 things. One, why do we fight? Where does it come from? And then 2, like, how do we find conflict resolution in a healthy way? So the first thing, let's jump right into it. Why do we fight? Where does conflict come from? Brad, what's the number one reason?
Yeah, I would think really, Bobby, there's 2 reasons. The first one we can talk about is really just natural differences, right? Differences in our personalities, differences in male and female, differences in upbringing and experience. These are not what we would say are right or wrong, right? We'll talk about those in a minute. These are just natural differences in who we are, for example, I know for Liz and I, early in our marriage, one thing that caused conflict is by her natural personality, Liz worried about things. Is that correct?
Very true.
Yeah, and so by my natural way is I didn't typically worry about things unless they were really bad, right? And so conflict would emerge when something would happen. She would be worried, and then either she would be upset at me for not maybe caring as much, or I would get upset with her and think that because she is worrying, she didn't trust me as the husband and the provider of the home, right? Why are you worrying, right? And so it would cause conflict. This wasn't things that were right or wrong. They were differences in our personalities.
Yeah, that's good. We were all raised different. We all have different parents, different grandparents, different experiences growing up. We all it's not right or wrong. It's just there are differences, and when those come up. Liz, do you have any differences to add to that?
Well, I think especially in the early days, I was a night person. He's a morning person. And so At night, when I'm all keyed up and I want to talk about something, that's when he's like, it's time to go to bed. If you want to get up and talk about it at 4:30 in the morning, we can absolutely do that. And I was like, no, thank you. So just like even getting on the same even keel of, working through things and expectations. Maybe,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
your parents did it one way, your family did it one way, and his family did it another way. And instead of, hey, let's talk about this, I just assumed he was going to do the same thing my dad did or my grandpa did or whatever. And so we all just come into marriage with these expectations that maybe we don't even realize we have.
That's good. And for us, I mean, differences, we grew up completely different. Jenn always tells people like we wouldn't have been friends in high school.
We wouldn't have been friends.
Jenn, what are some of our differences?
Everything. Like I worry about like what's happening right now, and you look at the future and how things are planned.
Yeah.
Ahead of I guess how things are planned for the future.
But even like for us, one of the big differences, like you talk about those expectations, we early in marriage, I mean, we had some big hurdles to go over. So much so that Jenn wanted to get me tested for some mental health issues.
Because he was gifted.
He's so gifted. Well,
gifted.
So we met when we were 18. We got married when we had just turned 21. So we were children, growing up together, and we ran with the same group of people. And I thought we had so much in common.
Yeah.
And then we got married, and we were two completely different people. And I didn't think I was messy, but he's just so like organized and put together and scheduled.
Yeah,
and I'm not.
My time, so growing up with no structure stability, when I could control it, I controlled everything. So at 6:35, when it's time to brush my teeth every morning, and my toothpaste isn't there, or my comb's not there, or whatever, like that's conflict, and we were so different, and we had to work through that. And she thought that, I had like impulsive, what is the obsessive compulsive disorder and stuff. And at the time, I was in school.
I watched a documentary.
Exactly.
And I was like, Bobby, this is you.
Yeah. So I legitimately, went to our counseling school at our university, and I went and sat down and got counseling. I went and got tested for everything. And it was crazy. But
he's fine.
Yeah,
we're just different.
Yeah. A lot of my stuff was just developmental issues growing up that I had to work through. But our differences early on, it was rough. And so that's definitely a key to understand that conflict comes between differences. It's not wrong. It's not right. But just embracing those differences is a key. The second source of conflict, it sounds... Brad, I mean, people listening may hear this and be like, well, that's kind of a cop-out.
Really, the second is, the word we're going to use is sin, right? So what does that mean? When you look in James chapter 4, verse 1 and 2, he even says, what's the source of the wars and the fighting that you do? He's not talking about nations fighting wars. He's talking about conflict among people. And he says, you simply desire and you do not have. He's talking about, it's all about you, right? And this is the most dangerous conflict when it boils down to selfishness, when I don't get my way, when I want to win a fight. So when you look at those, that conflict comes not from differences between us, it comes from selfish desires. And these can be the ones that hurt deep, they run deep, and they can cause the most damage.
Yeah. And, this type of conflict, the sin in us, often comes through a heart issue that we have.
Absolutely.
Something that I'm struggling with personally, I project that upon my spouse, and I start fighting her instead of fighting the sin that's within my heart. Mm-hmm. And that's where the struggle really comes in to how do we recognize, like what are ways we can recognize that sin or those heart issues, that this is a me problem that I'm projecting onto my spouse. Like, what are some ways as we're talking that we can help listeners understand the difference between those two?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I know a me problem for Brad is the need for approval, right? So the need for approval means I don't lose. Okay, so if I don't lose when we have conflict, either because of a natural difference or sin, then I will win this fight.
Yeah.
Okay. And so by doing so, I'm not going to compromise. I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to clearly communicate. If you go to marriage counseling and what they give you to do, I'm not going to do any of those, right? Because I'm going to win, right? Because winners get approval, right? And so that's one way, maybe I'm exaggerating, that it manifests itself, right? We're now, instead of having healthy conflict resolution, is I will attack and I will blame because of my sinful pride and my heart issues.
Yeah.
I think to tag along with that too is because when you are in a relationship with somebody, we've been married over 20 years. So we know our spouse's weak spots. We play dirty. So when we're in the middle of a heated conflict, we are pulling out all the things that we know are going to hurt the most. So we get the most bang for our buck, and we, in our own sin nature, start falling back into that and using that as a weapon rather than looking at someone and giving them grace in the situation. We get wrapped up in the moment and the heat of the argument.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the main ways, Bobby, that you can, if you tried to dissect and see, is this a sin problem or a difference problem, is really how do we respond to the conflict, right? One of the studies that we've referenced before is from the Gottman Institute, and they were able to identify through years of studies 90% of couples that their marriage would end in divorce. You say, how could they do that? Would 9 out of 10 times be right? And what they would do is they would observe how they responded to conflict.
Wow.
And if they responded with, contempt or criticism, those type of things, is they realized that their marriage was heading in a wrong place. And typically when we respond with criticism or defensiveness or stonewalling or contempt, it's because of our issues, not necessarily because what our spouse has done.
Yeah. And those response, I'm just going to interject with our marriage. One of the ways that we catch ourselves is we respond totally different. So for Jenn,
I just
shuts down.
Don't talk to me about it.
And I want to prove myself right, kind of like you. So when she shuts down, that just irritates me. So I just keep egging it on, and the cycle just continues and continues and continues. But in the reality, like I'm trying to defend myself because that's a sin issue on me, on my pride, that I've got this figured out. I can solve any problem, and I can make this happen. That's what I do. That's what I'm good at. And so let me fix this. And for Jenn, she's like, I just need a moment. And so for us, the way we respond is totally different in that. And but that can just keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper. That we'll talk about here in a little bit of how we go from it just being a little bitty problem to a big problem. And so we understand that conflict, if you're married, you deal with conflict. Like, you can't shy away from it. You can't run away from it. If you do, you're probably going to be like my dad, who was married 7 times. He just said, I don't want to listen to it. I'm out. And so for us, we want to be all about having a strong marriage that lasts. So when it comes to conflict, how do we find resolution? What are some healthy tips? What are some things for us to work through to find that resolution? There's 2 things we're going to talk about today, but the first one is, are we focused on the issue, or are we focused on the person? Brad, let's break this down a little bit. You want to share kind of this?
Sure. Hey, Bobby, I think what you said is extremely important, right? Is we got to separate the problem from the person, right? There's a danger when we focus on the person. So we've got to separate the problem from the person and protect the relationship. And I'll say that again, separate the problem from the person, protect the relationship. One of the examples we use is like a 3-story apartment building, where the first story is, in essence, level 1 is the issue. Right? Yeah. That's what you should focus on. Level 2 is the person. And then level 3 is the relationship. And danger comes as when we move past level 1 and we begin to focus on level 2. And then it gets extremely dangerous when we focus on level 3. A simplistic example that we can use is, let's say, I don't know if any couples had an issue with finances. For us, when we got married early in our marriage, that was it, right? And to just paint a sort of a scenario is, if you start with an issue, maybe it's Liz saying, you know what, we need to develop a budget and work and stick to it, okay? And so now we're focusing on the issue. We're not casting blame. We're talking about it. We're continuing that. Later, if there's issues still, is instead of focusing on the issue, it can become dangerous if we focus on the person, right? Well, now I can't believe you spent money on that, right? We don't have that money. You don't care about our future. How could you be so selfish, right? So you see, we've moved from the first floor of the issue, and now we're attacking the person.
Yeah.
If that continues, then we start to attack level 3, the relationship, right? Where now it's, you know what? This is not what I've signed up for. I can't do this anymore, right? And so that's dangerous when you go there. If you do that enough, and some issues will come up, you'll go straight to level 3. Right?
Yeah.
Something that you should focus on issue is you'll go right to attacking the relationship, and then that can be extremely dangerous.
Yeah. And so, Jenn, we talked a little bit about this at lunch. One of the things that we started off with in our marriage was an idea of who was doing what. And so, Jenn, tell us about
So the controlling person I am, I was like, I'm going to take care of all of our finances. I'm going to pay our rent, pay all of our bills. And then our water got cut off.
Yeah.
Because I'm awesome at finances.
So before
I'm like, Bobby, what happened?
Yeah,
and he's like, Jenn, you obviously didn't pay that.
Yeah, we got married and we established these little roles and different stuff. And so the problem was our finances. And so that we were on level 1, we were trying to work through all these little things. And then once the water got cut off, I distinctly remembering, who did I marry? Like, it went to level 2 real fast because the problem, we didn't deal with it. We didn't really talk about it. I was just like, yeah, you take care of that, whatever. But we let it get to level 2, and we never got to level 3, but it was so fast. That's just an example of how, the way we focus on the issue, it goes straight to the person. I start going, well, did you not think about this? Like, what'd you do? Like, who did I marry? Like, what did I get into? And so I started attacking you and your personality when it's just a small issue that we let fester. And what happens a lot of times with couples is they'll go to level 2 and then not letting that get resolved, level 3 constantly. And that's where I think, talking about the response, that's where divorce starts getting, because they go straight to, well, this just isn't working between us. We can't figure this thing out. We can't get this going. We can't figure out who's taking care of the bills and all that stuff. And so that's a huge part of doing that. But how do we practically, you guys chime in, how do we practically separate the problem from the person? Like, how do we practically do that? And how do we make it, and we say it all the time, how do I make this, whatever the issue is, me and you versus the issue instead of me versus you? How do we do that?
I think partly we have to be careful about our words. Words are huge. And thinking before we speak, like, I know if Brad and I are in a heated discussion about something, I have to stop and pray, Lord, I need wisdom in my words, because I am very quick to start saying always and never. Mm-hmm. And always and never are never good things to say.
They work great in an argument.
Yeah.
Yes, and your tone. Tone is everything. I can't even count how many times Brad and I have had arguments about discussions about tone.
Mm-hmm.
Because
that's, Bobby and I will say, it's not what you said to me, it's how you said it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think a practical tip is, okay, think about, what is your facial expression doing? What is your voice saying that your words are not? Because that can make or break a discussion.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And I think, Bobby, is really just asking the question. So what do I mean by that? If Liz and I, if we can tell, when you're married, you can tell when conflict is on the rise. Hey, what's the issue here? Right? The issue is not me. It's not you. What is the issue? It may be, as Liz just said, it may be communication. It may be how I responded to her earlier. It may be, okay, let's look at what the issue is and realize it's not one of us. And part of it is we go back to the mantra of assume the best, right? Okay, here's the deal. There's a gap between what I experienced and what I expected. I need to assume the best about my spouse, because in doing so, it'll keep me at level 1, right?
Yeah.
If not, I'm going to level 2, and I'm no longer protecting the relationship, or the person.
That's good. Jenn, anything else to add?
No. Bobby pays the bills now.
Yeah, I do pay the bills now.
So we did it. We had a good discussion about it. Yeah. I don't remember. I mean, that was forever and a year ago, but. Yeah. It
was a minute. So when it comes to conflict, finding that resolution, separating the problem from your spouse, from the person or the issue. So it's us versus the issue is a key when it comes to this. But another key, which is the second part of conflict resolution, is asking yourself, are you willing to apologize? Like, no conflict gets resolved without humility. And so if we understand and separate the problem from the person, like, are you willing to apologize when you're wrong? Why is it so hard for us to apologize?
It goes back to selfishness, right? And I'll back up and just say, for the guys and for the ladies listening out there, is your spouse the one who you married, who you pledged your earthly life for and to? For husbands, your wife is more important than you getting your way, right? Ladies, your husband is more important than you being right. And so if we move past that selfish nature, right? I remember one time hearing a preacher say that healthy couples fight for resolution, unhealthy couples fight to win, right? And so, Bobby, it goes back to is, well, how do we fight for resolution? Well, a big step of that is humility and then apologizing, right?
Yeah.
But man, apologizing is not fun.
Why is it so hard?
And it needs to be an appropriate apology, just like we teach our children. I used to tell my kids, you can't just say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You hurt your brother. You can't just say, I'm sorry, and walk away. Like, you need to look the person in the eye. You need to say, I apologize for, and say what it is. Name it. Because when you name it, you're taking responsibility for it. And it goes a long way in an apology to have someone take responsibility, not just, I'm sorry you feel that way. That's like a backhanded apology.
Right. And I think with in conflict, especially in marriage, is we feel hurt. We feel hurt by the one who loves us and knows us the most, right? So with that is, if Liz and I are in an argument, is we both own a piece of it. We both, it's rarely one person's fault. She owns a piece of it. I own a piece of it. But by my selfish nature, is I want her to apologize for her part first, right?
Yeah.
Is I deserve an apology. I was right, you were wrong. So within that is there's difficulty of who's gonna respond first, who's gonna be more Christ-like, show humility, should be willing to compromise. As pride is the sworn enemy of resolution, right? When pride drops, then conflict also drops.
Man.
I think pride too. Like, I just don't want to be, if I have to apologize or if I need to apologize, I don't want to be presented like I've failed, especially if I'm fighting for something that I think is right.
Yeah.
And it turns out not to be.
Yeah. And we dig our heels in, and there's so many times where I know I'm wrong in this. I know my tone was wrong. I know that something happened at work and I'm frustrated and I took it out on you, but it's still hard. It's still hard for us to own up to that. But the freedom comes when we can take a deep breath and say, I'm sorry for, just like you said, Liz, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry for doing that. I don't know how many times I've had to come to you, Jen, and tell you, like, okay, this is what's going on. I'm sorry that I said this, this, and this. I think I said it because of X, Y, and Z going on. But the other times, too, that I think a lot of couples that I've talked with and just counseled with over the years, and not to throw men under the bus, but I've heard wives say, you're just saying sorry so that we can move on. Like, do you ever find yourself in that? Like, what's the difference between like a genuine apology and just saying, I'm sorry?
Right. I think you're exactly right. I think there's, it's hard for us to apologize, and likewise, it's hard for us to receive an apology, right?
Sure.
I want, when I apologize, Liz, for her to accept it immediately and forgive me. When she apologizes to me, the selfish nature of me probably wants her to be punished a little longer, right? Is I want her to still feel this. I'm not willing to give her what she's probably given to me, right? And so I think it's not only working on apologizing, but am I willing, have I learned how to accept an apology from my spouse, right? Where I don't have to get into it. Yeah. And I think if there's a heartfelt apology, like, yes, I am sorry, that we no longer have to think that our spouse, well, you need to continue to be punished a little while longer, is that we can accept an apology just like we want them to accept our apology.
Yeah.
And accepting the apology and not bringing it up. Once you've already had that conversation, you've already talked it out, you've already apologized, and then, the next argument 2 weeks later, you bring it back up again. Bringing up old stuff that you've already apologized and forgiven for is not actually helping the situation.
Right. In the words of the great theologian Elsa, let it go.
Yes. Jen, did you hear that? It's not bringing it back up.
Shut your mouth.
We have a little conflict right here. No, all good. So these two things are huge, and we're not ignorant to say that if you do these two things, your marriage will be perfect. All conflict will be resolved. Like, no, that's not what we're saying. But these are two great starting points. Removing the situation, removing the problem from the person, not getting to level 3 is huge. But then the second one is just being honest and being willing to apologize and humility in that. And so if you are listening and you're like, okay, I want more information about either these things or conflict resolution or anything with your marriage, we have a great resource, empoweredhomes.org, that you can check out, some really great marriage resources. But as we close, I just want to take a few minutes to talk about this. One of the things that we say all the time is our marriage. I hope our marriage is a reflection of the gospel. Jen, just explain that a little bit as we close.
I think just us living our lives with our kids and our busy schedules and stuff, I want my life to be, or our marriage to be, as transparent as possible. Mm-hmm. Like, I want people to see Jesus in me, but I also want them to see the flaws. Yeah. Because that's real life. Yeah. That's not, putting a pretty bow on things and just pretending like everything's good, because it's not. Yeah. And we have, hills and valleys, and I would like to be at the top more than the bottom, but. Yeah. And we have friends who have struggled and come to us, mm-hmm. and we've sit around our table. And like, you've been in counseling, I've been in counseling, we've been in counseling together, and we've even been in counseling when things are good, because we just want to make sure that we're not missing something. Yeah. And, talking to people, and then me, casually mentioning that we went to counseling, they're like, what? Yeah. So I don't want everybody to know I'm in counseling, but I guess they do now. Yeah. But if it helps somebody else for them to strengthen their marriage and just have a better relationship with their spouse, by all means, do it. And for us as our marriage, and when it comes to conflict, how do we use that in a healthy way, mm-hmm. so that people can see transparency in the gospel through us, and that we can be the reflection? Because we've had times in our marriage where, like, it was not working, mm-hmm. and we needed help. Yeah. And for us to just be able to say that publicly to people, and we want them to know that that's part of our story, because if we're struggling, people are like, you're on staff at a church. Like, y'all can't do that. You're a pastor's wife. It gives You're supposed to smile all the time and wear heels. Yeah. but how many times we've been able to use our story to share the gospel and let people know that there's no such thing as being perfect. In the same sense, I know you guys, and watching you as parents, Brad and Liz, like, how is your marriage a reflection to teach your boys?
Right. Bobby, we've talked as how I handle conflict, how we handle conflict in the home, is the picture of the gospel to our kids, right? What does grace and mercy look like between mom and dad? What does that look like? What does forgiveness look like between mom and dad? So even at a young age, before they can even picture their heavenly father, how is their earthly father showing that to their mom? Right. Wow. And so that's a powerful reminder of not only do I have to answer to my Heavenly Father, but I've got to provide an example to my earthly kids that points them back to Him.
Yeah. So good. So how are we living out the gospel through our marriage, and how do people see Jesus through our marriage, and especially conflict? Because again, as we started, so many people in the church just come through straight face, smiling, everything's great. But the brokenness, the healing, the restoration, those are all things Jesus is about. And so we have a great opportunity to empower and equip those around us. So really exciting. If you want more information, like I said earlier, empoweredhomes.org has some great resources. Check them out on marriage and parenting. Thank you all so much. And it was fun. It was fun.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to the Empowered Homes podcast. For more content and information to connect church and home, please visit empoweredhomes.org.